Hello, my name is Mads Christiansen and I'm currently a Games Art Master student at the University of Hertfordshire. The topic of this video essay will be crowdfunding in the games industry. To me, this topic represents a big shift in the collective world of game development, and I was interested in finding out what positives and negatives and what changes the advent of crowdfunding have brought, as well as why people are using it. Before arriving at crowdfunding though, I'd like to briefly introduce the rise of indie and digital games. The world of digital games is expanding at an enormous rate, and has done so for a long time. In the recent years, however, there's largely been a shift in who plays games. Whereas before the pastime was more or less reserved for self-described gamers, now everyone from grandchild to grandparent can play, and everywhere too, thanks to the portable everyday devices. With the encouraging successes of smartphone games, other digital offerings soon followed suit. Games such as Super Meat Boy and Limbo were massive hits on their respective platforms as well. The interesting thing about a lot of these successes was that they were often created by very small teams, and usually without a publisher. This is where the term indie comes from, as these teams were independent of producers or publishers. With the rise of crowdfunding following such platforms as Indiegogo and Kickstarter, indie teams were able to dream even bigger, and could fund themselves working on the game, essentially bypassing living wages from the studio. I believe all of the advancements over the last decade has come together now. The rise of casual games increased through smartphones, which in turn allowed digital publishing and indie teams to flourish, which spread onto consoles, and now with crowdfunding, these teams can get the means to stand on their own legs. And so we finally arrive to the actual topic of the video. There are three types of different crowdfunding widely used. Equity-based crowdfunding, which is essentially the sale of a stake in a business to a number of investors. Donation-based, where individuals donate small amounts to meet the larger funding aim of a specific charitable project while receiving no financial or material return in exchange. And reward-based crowdfunding, where individuals donate towards a specific project with the expectation of receiving a tangible but non-financial reward or product at a later date in exchange for their contribution. As it's the most commonly used form of crowdfunding in games, this video essay will purely be about reward-based crowdfunding. Nesta compiled an interesting investigation into alternative financing methods in the UK in 2014, and among others looked into why different groups donated to different causes, and why different crowdfunding campaigns were attempted. With rewards-based, along with donation-based, a small part of which can be said to spill over into the rewards-based method in the lower brackets of rewards. Those asking for funds value it most having control over their projects, and this brings me to a powerful point, which I will address a little later in this video. Those donating to these causes were most often motivated by the campaign ideas and the possibility to use their money to make a difference. Other aspects mentioned in an article by Gerber and Hui included the desire to help others and support causes, and to be part of a community. This notion is mirrored in a wonderful article from the New York Times in 2013. In it, the author argues that part of the success of a platform like Kickstarter is that it isn't a store, and that it thus doesn't follow the logic of the free market. Instead, it follows the logic of the gift. Anthropologist David Graeber argues that humans do not naturally tend towards impersonal reciprocal exchange. Graeber refers to the Tiv people of West Africa who, when given a gift, always responds with something of slightly greater or lesser value. Thus, the outstanding debt between the two means that the relationship continues. The author argues that this notion is also a part of Kickstarter, in that the rewards are generally worth less than their market value, much like a tote bag. However, through this transaction, this personal logic of the gift exchange, the relationship is strengthened, not diminished. An article highlighting this effect is the article Playing on Both Sides of the Market by Svilichovsky et al. The data shown indicates that a campaign initiated by entrepreneurs who have previously supported others have higher success rate, attract more backers, and collect more funds. It is clear that crowdfunding is a big thing. It is a market that is growing year by year, and larger and more successful developers are gravitating towards the different platforms. People such as Tim Schafer, who successfully funded Double Fine Adventures, a team of ex-Rare employees who successfully funded Yooka-Laylee, Koji Igarashi, who funded Bloodstained Rituals of the Night, and Keiichi Inafune, who funded Mighty No. 9. But a lot of Kickstarter campaigns do fail, actually more than half of them, with several thousand not raising a single dollar. It takes a lot of work to be successful, but even a failed campaign can be helpful in the long run, as several hopeful campaigners have stated following one such. Even so, the fear of failure is the most commonly stated reason for avoiding crowdfunding. To try to put the topic of crowdfunding into perspective, I arranged an interview with the program leader of the Games Art courses at the University of Hertfordshire, Neil Gallagher, himself a former game developer. I asked Neil about the changes that crowdfunding has made in the industry.
Okay, so pre-crowdsource funding, it was just a case of looking for investors. I mean, I'll go back to like 1997, so back in those days it was just a case of looking for investors, and they would obviously, for their investment of say £2 million, they would want a big stake in that product or the company, which is still sort of unchanged today. Obviously crowdsource funding has really sort of been a big game changer since that's come around, because now people can go out and put their little prototype out, maybe on see if they get Steam greenlit for like going for the crowdsource funding, to sort of show there is that interest, and then if they get that funding, then obviously that's a huge advantage to them, because then they can really self-publish their game. They can put a lot more resources into it, a lot more hours, maybe outsourcing some of the products, some of the heads-up display can be outsourced, which obviously take quite a lot of development time. I think that's okay. Obviously, I mean those people like Ukulele and all these kind of people who form companies, eventually they'll become a big corporate company, and then they'll have that sort of like gravitas where people will want to invest in them, attach themselves to them, and expand. But I mean, to start off with, it's a hard grind doing it on your own. I mean, there are people out there like Phil Fish who made Fez, who are just hardcore and will do the whole product themselves. Jonathan Blow, there's people like that who made Braid. They're hardcore people who just tinker away in their room until they come up with a product, and they have to be very sort of like focused. So it is possible. There's plenty of people out there who do that. And then there's the working for the big corporate company. And obviously you're very much more sort of specialised in your niches. So if you're working on a huge project like say Battlefield or Call of Duty or something, you will be even down to like environment artists. You'll be a particular environment artist. You'll be like a landscape environment artist, or you'll be a asset prop artist, or you'll be a modular building creator, even down to outside building and interior design. It becomes that specialised. Where when you're indie, you have to sort of do everything yourself. You have to build the character, you have to texture it, rig it, build the environment that it sort of lives in. I don't think so, because a lot of those people they've pulled away from the company, and they're going on their own. And I think you need that, really. You need grassroots companies to sort of start again, to build something new up. Otherwise, I mean, we saw it recently with Lionhead going down. It's sort of like you can't just rehash the same thing day in, day out. You have to come up with new ideas, new concepts, and you have to sort of take that risk. And I think what someone who pulls away from a company and goes indie and just tries something, it's sort of fresh, and and it can be it's very successful. Products can come out of that. So I think it's a good thing.
An interesting article from Wired magazine highlighted an issue that I hadn't thought of before. In the scenario in the article, a kindergarten teacher in America had crowdfunded some things for her class: pencils, books, and playing box. But the fact that the same things had been crowdfunded meant that politicians could be given a reason to cut spending even further than they had already, thus actually contributing negatively to what was funded in the first place. I mentioned this point to Mr. Gallagher, but he did not see this become any issue with games.
No, I don't think so, because you get with crowdsourced funding. It's obviously, like I said, it's a grassroots company that it will naturally quantify itself and gets bigger, and then it gets the interest off the politicians. They'll give you the tax cuts, and like Boris Johnson has just put a couple of million into I think London gaming this month, where there's all kinds of little shows and events going on in London, and then things sort of will come out of that. Contacts and networks will start from that. So at the moment I'm not seeing it. I haven't seen any sort of like withdrawal from government support.
Now, it's pretty clear that the video games industry was doing fine without crowdfunding. Games were made and played, and the industry grew at a pretty steady level. So what is the big deal about crowdfunding really? Shouldn't a project, in this case a game, be able to be funded through producers and publishers if it's good enough? Well, the reality is that many of the successful crowdfunding games would most likely have been able to do so. But producers and publishers, through their investments, have a big say in the project, and their interests might conflict with those of the actual designer, potentially diluting the project into something lesser than it could have been. This is what was reflected in the reasonings that Nesta discovered when investigating reward-based crowdfunding and why people turned to it. Being able to control this thing that you in many cases are spending years on, being unlimited in your creativity, is the greatest appeal to most. Additionally, it's becoming abundantly clear by looking at the video games industry that big publishers, when paying hundreds of millions for a project, are not that keen on risky investments that might not make their money back. This has led to an industry of sequels and very little amount of risk-taking, a situation that not only most likely has resulted in the immense popularity of indie games, but also in developers breaking away from their parent companies due to a lack of autonomy. Andy Schatz, creator of Monaco, grand winner at the 2010 Independent Games Festival, said the following: "Big budget games are boring. Even the best ones are boring. Indie games often suck too, but because there are no corporate dollars involved, indie developers can make games that they're passionate about. Good indie games are never built for a demographic. They're built with the passion of the developer. In the best cases, that passion is infused into the game in such a way that it rubs off on the gamer." While it's too early to gauge the effect that these kinds of pure design games will have on the industry, after bigger companies have taken interest in before purely casual offerings such as smartphone games, I asked Mr. Gallagher about the effect that indie games, being as popular as they are, have had on the industry at large. So far, I've only discussed actual digital games, but a big player in the digital games community for the past few years has been the Oculus Rift. The Oculus is a wearable virtual reality headset, which was successfully funded on Kickstarter in 2012, and the industry has practically fallen over itself in an attempt to utilize this new technology. Just recently, Star Citizen, the most backed crowdfunding campaign ever, has unveiled plans to use the virtual reality headset. Furthermore, and perhaps owing to the massive interest in the Oculus, but also heeding the warnings and limitations of a wearable headset, last year at the E3 Expo in Los Angeles, the biggest gaming convention of the year, Microsoft unveiled their own plans for an augmented reality system in the Microsoft HoloLens. It's hard to believe that this massive interest would have been possible without crowdfunding. It is clear that the rise of indie games has contributed immensely to the industry. It has booming growth, the different genres of games being made are expanding, and more people are playing games than ever. As a part of indie games, crowdfunding, while not necessarily turning the industry completely on its head, represents something else entirely: autonomy and imagination. And if the projects and campaigns up to this point are any clue, it has been nothing but positive for the industry.